You're listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks, your source for centered and focused play therapy coaching.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Podcast, where you get a masterclass in child-centered play therapy and practical support and application for your work with children and their families. In today's episode, I am answering a question from Chris in the Virgin Islands. So nice to have someone email from the Virgin Islands, Chris. I'm so excited about that. And to all of my Virgin Islanders, big hello. Thanks so much for being a part of the Play Therapy Podcast family. So Chris actually asked two questions. So you're going to get a bonus freebie in this one. I'll address both of his questions in this. One is about children asking how much time they have left in their session. And the second is knowing when a child is ready for termination and the relationship and the attachment pieces of that specifically. So I will read parts of his questions and then we'll dive in. My name is Chris Ray. I'm a clinical social worker working in private practice in the Virgin Islands. I'm a consistent listener to your podcast. I'm so glad. I found myself oriented towards CCPT since I started working outpatient, and I'm one of the few clinicians at the practice I work for that meets with children. Isn't that almost always the case? We're the lone wolves. I have two questions. First question, I've noticed a pattern with some children who continually ask how much time they have left in their session. I have initially understood this as curiosity of how much time is left and planning their play in a scheduled manner. However, when it becomes a pattern, sometimes I have felt and questioned whether they are bored of their playtime. I've also begun to question whether they've hit their resistance threshold for introduction of new themes. I can't entirely tell. I'm curious of your thoughts on such a dynamic. All right, so we'll pause there and then I'll read the second question in a minute to not convolute everything. All right, Chris, really, thank you so much for these questions. So as far as a child asking how much time they have left, this is a very common occurrence in play sessions. And it's important, the why matters, always. It's important to figure out the why. And we can usually get a pretty good sense of what that looks like if we pause and interpret what's going on. For example, if the child is asking with the tone, aura, or implication that they're really hoping that time is almost up, that likely indicates they probably want to leave the session. So either they have just done all the work that they can handle that day and they're ready for a break, or they don't want to be there anymore, or they've just kind of reached their barrier and they're just like, I just wish this was over. So that would be a very different reason for asking how much time is up versus a child with really, really high levels of anxiety. So a really highly anxious child would likely be asking because they are trying to have knowledge, because knowledge is power, and power is the antidote to anxiety. When you have power and control over things, nothing surprises you. Nothing catches you off guard. And that is the absolute worst scenario for a highly anxious kid, is to be surprised and caught off guard. So an anxiety-rooted scenario could be a reason why a child is asking. Sometimes they're just truly curious. Sometimes a child just really wants to know how much time is left. And it's a relatively innocent question. I think you kind of alluded to that. You said originally I thought it might have been one thing, but then it became a pattern. So now I'm questioning. If it's just kind of an outlier scenario where you only hear it once or twice, sometimes it really is just curiosity. I know we have a limited amount of time, so how much time do we have left? It can also be, as you mentioned, to plan accordingly, because certain personalities of kids do not want to run out of time, do not want to get in the middle of something and then not be able to finish it. And they want to manage how they're going to play and how much time remains in the session. And then as a little bit less common reason, sometimes kids will have an external reason for wanting to end early, but it's not that they're bored or that they don't want to be there. Maybe mom promised them ice cream when the session was over. So they're just really looking forward to ice cream. And the sooner they can finish their play session, the sooner they get ice cream. And it really can just be something as simple as that. So the goal when a child asks is, number one, to reflect the content or the feeling or both. You're curious about how much time we have left. That would be a feeling reflection. Or, you want to know how many minutes we still have. That would be a reflection of content. And sometimes just acknowledging that the child is curious or thinking about it is enough. But if a child persists, you know that there is a reason why they're asking and they truly want an answer. We typically try to avoid providing an answer to any question that a child asks us 3 different times, but if they repeat it a 3rd time, then we know that they likely really do want us to answer the question. So then at that point, we give a very factual, neutral, age-appropriate answer. So when kids ask me how much time is left, I reflect several times, and then I say, it's really important to you that you know how much time we have left. We have 14 more minutes. And then you'll get a sense of why they were asking sometimes. Because if they go, oh man, you know they wanted it to be over quickly. If you say 14 minutes and they go, no, then you know they were hoping it was much more than that and they want to stay longer. So there's a really helpful way to figure out the why when we reflect several times and then do provide them with an answer. So that is my suggestion and my thought as far as why a child might ask how much time is left. So now let's dive into the next question. And this one is about knowing when a child is ready to move into termination. So he says, I understand the phases and tracking dynamics and behaviors. However, how exactly do you do this when a child is ready to transition out? I work with a 12-year-old boy who has hit all of the milestones and goals his grandmother laid out for him, and I feel that she is ready to stop bringing him. However, I feel we're in the midst of processing relational grievances regarding his absent mother and father. For context, I almost feel that he looks forward to our sessions all week. I guarantee you he does. And that I am a transferential object relations figure for him, which makes me feel uncomfortable to a certain degree. I feel uncomfortable due to the fact that I cannot be available for the entirety of his life, and I often feel pressured by the managed care aspect of clinics. I also feel nervous to what degree he attaches to me. I don't quite know what that says about me or him. Curious about your thoughts. Okay, so first and foremost, let's talk about assessing readiness for termination. If you haven't listened in order, we talked about termination phase a while back. So if this is very foreign to you, please go back and start at episode 1. For those of you that are familiar with termination, what are the reasons why we decide that a child is ready to begin the termination phase? There you go. I'm sure you all answered appropriately. So they are, for those of you that had no idea how to answer that question, they are that there is resolution of presenting issues. We see regulation and stability across all environments. We see no new themes being introduced into the play. And we do not see shifts taking place within existing themes. So in other words, let's say the child continues, in your case, Chris, you mentioned he's still playing out relational play. Okay, so if we know he's doing relational work and you are seeing things shift and change as he's working through that relational dynamic, we know that he is still actively doing work and therefore we know he is not ready to terminate. So there are 4 reasons that we're constantly evaluating, or 4 criteria rather, that we're constantly evaluating to determine if a child is ready to begin the termination process. What you're describing, my gut tells me he is not ready to terminate. Yes, he has met the milestones and goals. That means that he has regulated. That means that he likely has built an emotional vocabulary and likely has built coping skills. However, usually we see there's a hierarchy in what kids are going to process. So I suspect that he worked on all of the other things, which has allowed him to better regulate, which is why grandma's pleased. But we also know that there's going to be harder work toward the end. So if he is now working on relational dynamics and aspects, that is much harder, deeper stuff. So it's going to hang on longer and it will take longer for him to get there. So we're always going to look at those 4 criteria for preparation for termination. If we recognize that he is constantly building coping skills, he's constantly building resilience, He's building an emotional vocabulary. He's building problem-solving skills. He's building an emotional IQ. He trusts himself. He accepts himself. He values himself. All of these things equip him to do life without you, Chris. And this is true for all of us. You're absolutely right that he's not going to have you for the rest of his life. And that is never the premise of CCPT, and it's never the goal. The goal is that the child does the work, the child carries the skills that they've acquired with them forever, and they are better equipped to handle whatever comes. We just serve as the guide rails. We serve as the therapeutic partner on the journey, but they're not better because of what we did. They're better because of the work that they did. So it's very important to recognize that even when you are no longer in his life, he has worked and built all of this stuff that he's going to need. So while you've been a part of that and you've been a necessary component of his healing journey, you are not a requirement long-term. And that's why Rogers, we go back to Rogers, we go back to person-centered and then child-centered. We know that the whole premise is that people self-actualize and the relationship is at the heart of that, but they don't need that person in their life forever. They need the environment and the relationship. They do the work, and then that work carries on once they are through that part of their journey. So it's really important that we recognize that he will do what he needs to do and then take that with him. And you mentioned that you feel that he might have some attachment to you. He should. Let's think about this for a second. What is the most important component of CCPT? Yes, thank you. The relationship. So we understand that this relationship that this 12-year-old has built with you, Chris, it is extremely significant to him. It is extremely important to him. It is valuable. It is meaningful. It is necessary. Especially in the absence of a mom and dad, I'm sure he absolutely is attached to you and values coming to see you. And he should, because we understand that the relationship is at the heart of everything. And so that's why we have to have a termination phase. That's why it is a process, because we allow him to have a healthy and happy goodbye. So when he is ready, I would argue he's not yet. When he's ready, you're going to go through the termination process with him. And it is a phase so that he can prepare to do this without you, and he can feel ready to handle it, and he can say goodbye and know that it's not a forever goodbye. We make it very clear that a child can always come back and see us. Why? Because the relationship persists even if we're not meeting with them weekly. So that's really important to be mindful that we have to keep the relationship at the heart of it, which means attachment takes place. It should. And then it actually allows them to understand what it means to say goodbye in a healthy way and know that that relationship and that person is still there for them, even without consistency in or frequency in sessions. So Chris from the Virgin Islands, thank you so much for the question. I'm really excited to hear from you. And I hope that was helpful to kind of have a bonus in that one. You got 2 questions for the price of 1. But I think both of these issues are something that we really need to be mindful of. We need to know that kids are going to ask how much time is left and what's behind that. And then also that we need to be mindful of when a child is ready to terminate. So really appreciate that. If you all would like to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you, Brenna at thekidcounselor.com. If you are signed up for the conference in Australia, please go to playtherapypodcast.com/meetup and reserve your spot for the meetup when we're in Brisbane. And otherwise, I love y'all. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and resources, please go to www.playtherapypodcast.com.